capture an entire species with a single voice. No dialects, no mistranslation, no moment anywhere on earth where one person cannot understand another. According to Genesis chapter 11, this was humanity's condition in the earliest generations after the flood. One language, one vocabulary, one shared understanding, moving together across the plain of Shinar as though they were a single organism rather than a scattered species. And then they built something, and that decision would fracture human communication so completely that the effects, according to the text, remain with us today. The story is called the Tower of Babel. But the real mystery buried inside it is not simply what the tower was. It is why an act of construction provoked a response so severe that it reshaped the fundamental nature of human community permanently. Genesis is specific about the builder's motivation, and it is worth pausing on their exact words, because the text hands us their reasoning directly, without interpretation. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Two motivations, stated plainly. Reputation, make a name for ourselves, and security, lest we be scattered. This was not idle ambition. It was a fortress against the very thing the text says God had commanded them to do in the first place: fill the earth and spread across it. Humanity, in this account, is not merely building. It is actively resisting its own assigned destiny. What exactly does a tower with its top in the heavens mean? The Hebrew phrase does not necessarily claim the structure physically touched the sky. In the ancient Near East, this kind of language was a known architectural idiom. Inscriptions describing Mesopotamian temple towers frequently used near-identical phrasing to convey height, grandeur, and divine ambition, not literal contact with the heavens. The claim was rhetorical as much as physical. But rhetoric alone does not explain why the response it triggered was so absolute. To understand what kind of structure the builders may have envisioned, we have to look at what was actually rising across the Mesopotamian landscape during this era, the ziggurat. These were massive stepped temple towers, built from mud brick, dominating the skylines of cities like Ur, Uruk, and eventually Babylon itself. Their purpose was explicitly religious, understood as a stairway connecting the earthly and divine realms, a physical bridge where gods might descend and humanity might ascend, at least symbolically. The most famous of these in later Babylonian history was Etemenanki, a colossal ziggurat dedicated to the god Marduk, its name translating roughly to the foundation of heaven and earth. Some scholars propose that Etemenanki, or an earlier structure like it, may have shaped the cultural memory behind the biblical account, given its location, its scale, and its explicit heaven and earth symbolism. This remains a scholarly proposal, not a settled identification. No archaeological find has ever been conclusively linked to the Tower of Babel, and the biblical text itself provides no verifiable coordinates, no construction date, and no ruins to search for. The mystery is architectural as much as theological, and then, in one of the strangest lines in the entire chapter, the narrative shifts perspective entirely. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. Read that again. Humanity believes it is constructing something that reaches into the heavens, and the text's response is not divine alarm from on high. It is God descending to inspect a structure apparently too small to be visible from where he already was. Scholars have long noted the deliberate irony embedded here. The builder's ambition is measured against the vast scale of the divine and found, almost comically, insufficient. Whatever they thought they had reached, they had not reached far. This is the moment everything turns, and the text gives God's own internal reasoning, rendered as something startlingly close to concern. Behold, They are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. This single sentence has generated centuries of theological debate. Is this a statement about unchecked human capability, that unified language and unified purpose grant humanity a kind of power requiring restraint? Or is it something else entirely, a statement about the specific danger of centralized, singular human authority, resistant to the diversity and dispersal God had originally intended? What happens next is the detail most people remember and understand least. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. Confuse, not destroy, not erase. The Hebrew word balal means to mix or confound. And it is not coincidental that it sounds strikingly similar to the name Babel itself, a wordplay the text seems to construct deliberately. But what actually happened at this moment remains genuinely contested. Did an instantaneous supernatural event produce entirely new languages on the spot, dividing a single people into linguistically isolated groups in an instant? Or is the passage a theological narrative explaining an already existing reality, the observable fact that human beings, scattered across the ancient world, already spoke mutually unintelligible languages, by attaching a moral and spiritual cause to it? Jewish and Christian interpreters across the centuries have taken both positions, and neither can be definitively ruled out by the text alone. What is not disputed is the outcome described. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. The tower's fate afterward is left ambiguous. The text does not explicitly narrate its destruction, only that construction stopped and the people scattered, unable to coordinate the labor a monumental project like this would require without shared language. The most direct consequence of confusion was not chaos or violence. It was simply the collapse of the single condition that made the entire project possible, mutual understanding. And this raises the deepest interpretive tension in the whole account. What precisely was the offense? Some interpreters center the story on pride, an act of hubris, humanity attempting to elevate itself to divine status through architecture and ambition. Others emphasize rebellion against a specific divine command to spread across and fill the earth, reading Babel as active defiance rather than mere overreach. Still others focus on the political dimension, a single language enabling a single centralized authority, and God's response as a check against the concentration of unchecked human power in one place, under one voice, answerable to no one. A smaller strand of interpretation reads the builders' true motivation as fear, the desperate desire to avoid the very scattering they knew was coming, clinging together rather than obeying. These readings are not mutually exclusive, and the text itself does not force a single answer. What all of them share is a recognition that Babel is fundamentally a story about the limits placed on human unity and ambition, and what happens when those limits are tested. The name Babel itself carries one final layer of irony. In Akkadian, the language of ancient Babylon, Bab-Ilu meant Gate of God, a name of tremendous honor, describing the city as a sacred threshold between heaven and earth. But the Hebrew narrative reframes it entirely, linking the name instead to Balal, confusion. What Babylonian tradition celebrated as a gateway to the divine, the biblical author transforms into a monument to fractured human ambition. This wordplay was almost certainly intentional, a linguistic verdict passed on the city before Babylon ever became the empire that would later conquer Jerusalem itself, a connection biblical writers would return to again and again in the centuries that followed, using Babylon as an enduring symbol of imperial arrogance and divine judgment. No archaeological excavation has ever produced conclusive physical evidence of the specific tower described in Genesis 11. Etemenanke's ruins exist, studied and documented, but the identification with the biblical Babel remains an interpretive proposal rather than an established fact. What survives instead is something less tangible and, in its way, more enduring. A story about what happens when a unified humanity tries to make itself permanent, powerful, and unforgettable on its own terms. Did Babel really preserve the memory of a tower that once dominated the Mesopotamian plain? Or was the tower always meant to represent something much larger, humanity's attempt to reach beyond the limits placed upon it? 3,000 years later, the plain of Shinar offers no definitive answer. Only the echo of a single sentence, spoken in one language, before everything changed. If you have a theory, leave it in the comments. And if these ancient mysteries fascinate you, the next one is already waiting.